The theater lights buzzed overhead, casting sharp white beams across the scuffed wooden stage. Backstage, laughter erupted, not the warm kind, but the sharp-edged kind that slices through silence and lands right behind your back. Alina stood near the curtain, clutching her rehearsal shoes in one hand and trying not to let her fingers tremble. She hadn't come here to be seen. She'd come here to try. A small audition, a local talent show, a stage that could lead to something, anything that didn't look like cleaning shifts or working weekends at the diner. But the moment she'd walked into the room, everything had shifted. The other contestants noticed her worn sneakers, her unbranded leotard, the way her hair wasn't perfectly styled. One of them, Lena, the crowd favorite with the big online following, had leaned toward a judge and whispered something behind her perfectly manicured hand. It wasn't hard to guess what she'd said. Later, when the judges had accidentally skipped her name, Alina had quietly waited in the corner, not wanting to cause a scene. That's when one of the stagehands, clearly in on the joke, loudly said, "Oh, go on then. Give us a twirl. Let's see what the underdog can do." The crowd chuckled. Even one of the judges grinned. She was being pushed on stage not as a real contestant, but as entertainment, a filler act, a joke. She could have walked away, but instead Alina tied her shoes, stepped into the spotlight, and took a slow, deep breath. If they were going to make her dance for their amusement, she would give them a performance they would never forget. The silence that followed Alina's first few movements was subtle, almost unnoticeable. A few whispers still floated through the audience, but even those began to die out as something shifted in the air, something delicate and undeniable. Her body moved not with the polish of someone trained in elite studios, but with something rarer, something more powerful. Honesty. She didn't dance like she was trying to impress anyone. She danced like she was remembering. Each motion, each turn, each slow extension of her arm carried a story, a pain, a memory, the weight of being invisible in rooms that only looked for glitter, the ache of nights spent practicing in the narrow kitchen while the soup simmered on the stove, the quiet longing to be seen, not for her clothes or her background, but for her soul. And slowly, people began to see it. Phones that had been raised to mock her stayed still, no longer recording out of ridicule, but awe. The judges leaned forward. Even Lena, who had just rolled her eyes moments before, was now frozen in place, a strange uncertainty flickering in her expression. Alina's body moved across the stage with purpose. Her movements weren't textbook, they were lived, the kind of dancing that came from somewhere so deep, no classroom could ever teach it. The kind of movement that didn't follow steps, but emotion. When she did her final turn and landed in a gentle kneel, one arm raised like a fragile branch reaching for sunlight, the entire room held its breath. There was no applause yet, only silence. The kind that doesn't happen by accident. The kind that comes when people know they've just witnessed something real. Alina rose slowly, unsure of what she'd just done. The lights were still hot, and the judges still silent. But she could feel it. They were no longer laughing. The silence broke, not with laughter, but with the sound of a single hand clapping, slow, deliberate. It echoed through the theater like thunder in a still sky. Then another clap, then another, until the entire room erupted in applause. Not the kind forced by social cues or politeness, but the kind that rises out of sheer awe. Alina stood there, stunned. Her breathing was heavy, her chest rising and falling beneath the thin fabric of her practice top. The lights now felt warm instead of harsh, and the same people who had giggled when she stepped on stage were now on their feet, clapping as though they were trying to make up for their silence, no, their cruelty. The lead judge, a woman known for her sharp tongue and impossible standards, stood slowly, still clapping, her expression unreadable. Then she leaned forward, pressed the mic button, and said just 2 words. That moved. She paused, glanced sideways at the others on the panel, and added, "I haven't seen something that honest in years." The younger male judge, who had earlier laughed at the stagehand's joke, now looked visibly embarrassed. He adjusted his tie and leaned toward the mic. "Miss Alina, is it? Where did you train?" She swallowed hard, voice barely steady. "Nowhere official. I practiced at home. I've never been able to afford classes." A murmur swept through the audience. The third judge, an industry veteran with decades of performance under his belt, shook his head in disbelief. "You don't need formal training when your heart already knows the language." Alina blinked quickly, trying to keep the tears from falling. She wasn't used to praise. She wasn't used to being seen at all. And then, Lena, the reigning star of the circuit, stood slowly. The same girl who had whispered and sneered. But now, her expression had changed. She approached Alina on stage, hesitating for a moment before offering a small, awkward nod. "You're not just good," Lena said quietly. "You're the kind of good that makes the rest of us look rehearsed." Alina said nothing. She didn't have to. The room had already said it all. After the audition, Alina didn't head straight for the exit like she had planned. She sat in the far corner of the auditorium's waiting area, her bag clutched tightly in her lap, hands still slightly trembling, not from nerves anymore, but from everything that had just happened. The buzz in the building was unmistakable. Contestants whispered her name in hallways. Assistants kept peeking into the room where she sat as if to confirm she was still there. Her performance, intended as nothing more than a chance to be heard, had turned into something else entirely. A shift. The show's producer, a woman with a sharp bob haircut and an even sharper sense for talent, approached quietly and took the seat next to her. She didn't say anything right away, just observed Alina for a moment, studying her the way someone studies a spark, trying to understand if it's lightning or just a trick of the eye. "You know," she said finally, "we've had classically trained dancers audition here who couldn't stir the air like you just did." Alina glanced at her, unsure if it was a compliment or a polite dismissal. "That wasn't a performance," the woman continued. "That was a revelation." Alina didn't know what to say, so she stayed quiet, nodding slightly. "We want you on the show," the producer said, "not just for a single episode, for the full season. And I don't care what your resume says or doesn't say. We'll train you, support you, but only if you promise not to lose that." She tapped lightly over Alina's heart. "What you danced with." Alina looked down at her worn bag, the same one she had carried through every part-time shift, every practice session in a cramped kitchen, every rejection letter. This time, though, she felt the weight of it shift, lighter now, not because it held less, but because her world had just made space for something more. She stood up slowly, extending her hand. "I promise." And with that one handshake, her journey changed. She was no longer the girl who danced at the back of the room. She was the reason the whole room turned to face the stage. The weeks that followed were nothing like Alina had imagined, because in truth, she had never dared to imagine them at all. She was now officially a contestant on one of the biggest televised talent shows in the country. Her name was on the schedule, her photo was on the cast board, her dressing room, though smaller than the favorites, had a nameplate on the door. For the first time in her life, she wasn't someone who waited in the hallway. She was someone who belonged. But the transition wasn't all applause and praise. The reality of stepping into the spotlight came with pressure. Rehearsals were long, exhausting, and often humbling. She struggled to adjust to mirrored studios, complex choreography, and critiques from professionals who expected perfection. There were moments when she felt like an imposter, like a small-town girl walking through a dream far too grand for her shoes. Still, she didn't quit. Not when the steps felt too fast, not when her knees ached from practicing past midnight, not even when other dancers whispered behind her back, calling her lucky or a sympathy story. Because Alina knew this wasn't luck. It was everything she had earned in silence for years. Her second performance aired 3 weeks after her audition. This time, she danced not just with memory, but with intention. Every move sharper, stronger, but still carrying that same raw emotion that had first captured hearts. The audience didn't just applaud this time. They roared.
Social media lit up overnight. Clips of her performance spread across platforms. Dance critics who had once ignored underground talent now wrote about her with unexpected reverence. One headline read, "The girl who danced from the shadows now owns the stage." And backstage, as she sat catching her breath, a small bouquet of wildflowers was delivered to her room. No name, just a simple note. Keep dancing like no one's watching, even now that everyone is. She didn't need to guess who had sent it. It was from someone who had seen her long before the lights ever did. And as she closed her eyes and let the applause from the stage echo in her chest, Alina realized she was no longer chasing a dream. She was dancing inside one. The night of the finale arrived like a thunderstorm, loud, electric, impossible to ignore. The studio was packed wall to wall with spectators, cameras, industry insiders, and a judging panel that had grown visibly more respectful with each passing week. But no one carried more quiet power than Alina, who stood backstage in a simple costume stitched with gold thread, not to impress, but to reflect who she had become. She wasn't the underdog anymore. She was the one everyone was waiting to see. As the host's voice echoed through the speakers, "And now, a finalist who needs no introduction." Alina stepped onto the stage, and this time there were no snickers, no eye rolls, no one nudged a neighbor or whispered anything mocking. They leaned in, because they knew what was coming. The music began, slow, haunting, and powerful. Her dance told the story of every person who had been laughed at, doubted, pushed aside. It spoke without a single word of the ache of being invisible, the courage of showing up anyway, and the fire it takes to turn pain into art. Her body moved like a flame, soft 1 second, then fierce the next. She wasn't dancing for approval, she was dancing because it was hers. When she finished, there was silence again, but it was sacred this time, like the quiet after something holy. Then the room exploded in applause so loud it made the rafters shake. The judges rose to their feet. One had tears in her eyes. The same producer who once doubted whether she'd even fit the camera frame was now standing in the wings, stunned. The results didn't matter. Whether she won or lost, Alina had already claimed something greater. That night, the winner's name was announced, and it wasn't hers. Another contestant took the trophy, a polished dancer with years of studio training and a long resume. And Alina? She just smiled, because she understood something now. Trophies gather dust, but truth echoes.
The results didn't matter.
Whether she won or lost, Alina had already claimed something greater. That night, the winner's name was announced, and it wasn't hers. Another contestant took the trophy, a polished dancer with years of studio training and a long resume. And Alina? She just smiled. Because she understood something now, trophies gather dust, but truth echoes. Backstage, while reporters swarmed the new winner, a quiet line formed by Alina's dressing room. Young dancers, quiet ones, nervous ones. Ones who saw her and thought, if she could, maybe I can too. And that was her prize. She hadn't just danced her story. She had become a reason someone else might start theirs.